The house settled around me with a contented sigh, the way a well-loved dog collapses at its owner's feet. I designed that sigh, just as I designed the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the bruised twilight sky and the heated concrete floors that warmed my bare feet. This house wasn't just my home. It was my heart, my portfolio, my vindication. Every line, every material, every beam of light was a testament to a promise I'd made to myself a decade ago. I would build a life so solid, so beautiful, that my family's toxic gravity could never pull me back into its orbit. My phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. The caller ID read "Mom," and my stomach instantly clenched. It was a Pavlovian response, honed over 32 years of her carefully curated emotional manipulations. I let it ring twice more, taking a deep, fortifying breath of the cedar-scented air in my minimalist living room before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Rebecca, darling, I have the most wonderful news." Her voice was a confection of forced cheerfulness, a tone that always preceded a request. "You'll never guess who's coming home." I knew, of course I knew. There was only one person whose arrival would warrant this level of fanfare. "Olivia," I said, my voice flat. "Yes, her and Mark. His company is transferring him back to the city. Isn't it marvelous? The family will finally be all together again." Marvelous, a word I would not use. My sister, Olivia, was the son to which my family's universe had always been tethered. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose every whim was catered to. I was the moon, orbiting at a distance, my light only a pale reflection of her brilliance in their eyes. I had moved out at 18 and never looked back, clawing my way through architecture school, working 3 jobs, and slowly, painstakingly, building my own world. Olivia had floated through life on a cloud of parental support, her art history degree leading to a series of creative pursuits funded by my father. "That's great, Mom," I managed, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "We're all going to come over for dinner on Friday to celebrate. Your place, it's so much bigger and nicer than ours, perfect for a family gathering." It wasn't a question, it was a decree. A familiar dread, cold and heavy, settled in my gut. My home, my sanctuary, invaded, but the years of conditioning were hard to shake. A small, traitorous part of me still yearned for their approval, for a single crumb of the affection they showered on Olivia. "Of course," I heard myself say. "Friday is fine." The days leading up to the dinner were a blur of anxiety. I found myself cleaning obsessively, as if a spotless house could somehow deflect the inevitable criticisms. I polished the quartz countertops until they gleamed, vacuumed the hand-woven rug I'd splurged on after winning my first major design award, and arranged a bouquet of sterile, elegant calla lilies in the center of the dining table. I was preparing for battle. They arrived precisely at 7, a united front of forced smiles and veiled judgments. My father clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes scanning the room with a look that was more appraisal than admiration. "Good to see you're putting all that schooling to use, Becca." My mother kissed the air beside my cheek, her perfume cloying. "The house is lovely, dear. A bit modern for my taste, but lovely." Then came Olivia, draped on Mark's arm, a picture of effortless glamour. She swept into the room, her eyes doing a rapid, dismissive inventory. "Wow, Becca, you did all this. It's a lot." Mark, a man whose ambition was only matched by his smarm, smirked. "You've certainly landed on your feet. It's amazing what a little luck can do." Luck, the word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Not work, not sacrifice. Not the all-nighters fueled by caffeine and desperation, or the years of ramen noodles and second-hand clothes. Just luck. The dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Every compliment was backhanded, every question a veiled interrogation. "This wine is delicious," Olivia said, swirling the expensive Merlot I'd bought for the occasion. "You must have a generous expense account." "I saw your firm's name on that new downtown tower," Mark chimed in, tearing a piece of bread. "Heard the lead architect on that project is a genius. You're lucky to work under someone like that." He knew perfectly well I was the lead architect. I'd sent them the press release. I smiled, a tight, brittle thing. "I'm very proud of that project." My parents, as always, acted as referees, gently steering the conversation whenever my discomfort became too obvious, but never, ever defending me. They were enablers, placating the golden child and her husband at the expense of their other daughter's sanity. By the time I served dessert, a lemon tart I had baked from scratch, an offering of peace they didn't deserve, I was emotionally exhausted. My jaw ached from the forced smiling. It was then that my mother chose to strike. She placed her fork down with a delicate clink, beaming at Olivia. Now, for the real reason we're celebrating. My father cleared his throat, taking the cue. Becca, your mother and I were thinking. Olivia and Mark are going to need a place to stay while they get settled, and you have all this space. I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. I knew what was coming. I could feel the gilded bars of the cage they were building around me. It's just for a little while, my mother added, her voice syrupy sweet. Just until they find their own place. You have 2 extra bedrooms after all, it's the perfect solution. Olivia looked at me, her eyes wide with a practiced innocence. We wouldn't be any trouble, Becca. It would be just like when we were kids. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. They all looked at me, their faces a mixture of entitlement and expectation. They weren't asking. They were informing. They had discussed it, planned it, and decided it without a single thought for me. They saw my home not as the culmination of my life's work, but as a resource to be plundered for their favored daughter. My father delivered the final, casual blow. You're single, Becca. You have more than you need. It's your duty to help your family. More than I need. The words echoed in the cavernous space that had suddenly opened up in my chest. They saw my success not as something I had earned, but as an excess, a surplus that should be redistributed to the one who truly deserved it. I looked at their smiling, expectant faces, and for the first time in a long time, the dread began to burn away, replaced by the cold, hard flame of rage. They had no idea what they had just done. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken my peace for an invitation, and they were about to learn how wrong they were. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and expectant. 4 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for the inevitable capitulation. For a moment, the old Rebecca, the one conditioned to please, to smooth things over, almost surfaced. She would have given a tight, pained smile and said, "Of course, let's make it work." But the woman who had designed this house, the one who had poured her own concrete and bled for her own dream, refused to be silenced. I placed my fork and knife deliberately on my plate, the ceramic click echoing the sudden, sharp clarity in my mind. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. My mother's smile faltered. "No, what do you mean no?" "I mean no, they can't move in," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. I looked directly at Olivia, then at Mark. "This is my home. It's not a hotel, and it's not a temporary solution for your housing problem." Olivia's jaw dropped. A flush of angry red crept up her neck. "You're kidding, right? Becca, we're family." "Exactly," I said, my gaze unwavering. "And family doesn't treat one another's homes like community property." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. "Rebecca, that's enough. Your sister needs your help. This is not a negotiation. It's your duty." "My duty?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that was entirely foreign to me. "My duty was to myself, to drag myself out of the hole of your expectations and build a life on my own terms. I have fulfilled that duty. My obligations to this family, the ones that require me to set myself on fire to keep you warm, ended a long time ago." The room erupted. My mother's face crumpled into tears, the weaponized waterworks she'd perfected over a lifetime. "I don't understand why you're being so cruel, so selfish, after everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I shot back, the dam of my restraint finally breaking. "You paid for Olivia's college, her car, her wedding. You funded her artistic lifestyle for a decade. I worked 3 jobs to get through school. I took the bus for 7 years. I ate ramen noodles and wore clothes from thrift stores. Everything I have, I earned. And you have the audacity to call me selfish for wanting to keep it." Mark, who had been watching the exchange with a smug, detached amusement, decided to intervene. He patted Olivia's hand, his voice oozing condescension. Now, let's all calm down. Becca is just being a little dramatic. She's not used to sharing." "Oh, this is rich," I said, turning my fury on him. "You, who have been living off my parents' generosity for years, want to lecture me about sharing." "That's not fair," Olivia cried, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Mark has a great job, we're doing fine." "Then you should have no problem finding your own place to live," I said calmly. It was then that the real agenda, the one lurking beneath the layers of manipulation and entitlement, was finally unveiled. My mother, her tears miraculously drying, looked at my father with a pointed glance. He cleared his throat, adopting the booming, authoritative tone he used when he was about to lay down the law. "Rebecca, let's be sensible about this," he began. "You're a single woman. This house is excessive for your needs. Olivia and Mark are starting a family. They need a stable home, a place with a yard for the kids." I stared at him, a cold, creeping horror dawning on me. "What are you saying?" "We're not just talking about a temporary stay," my mother said, her voice now stripped of all its earlier warmth. It was cold, hard, and demanding. "We're saying you should give the house to Olivia." The words hung in the air, so audacious, so utterly monstrous, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an expectation. They had moved past the idea of a temporary stay and had jumped straight to the grand prize. "You want me to give my sister my house?" I whispered, the words feeling alien on my tongue. "It's the right thing to do," Olivia said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You can get a condo downtown, something more appropriate for your lifestyle. We need this house. We deserve it." Deserve. There was that word again, the mantra of the entitled. I was so stunned, so utterly poleaxed by the sheer, unmitigated gall of their demand, that I could only stare at them. They had already moved on, discussing the future of my home as if the deal was done. "We'll need to repaint this room, of course," Olivia said, waving a dismissive hand at my carefully chosen charcoal gray walls. "Something warmer, and the kitchen needs a complete overhaul. It's so sterile." Mark nodded in agreement. "I'll get some quotes for a new island, and we can knock down that wall to the study to make a bigger family room." They were carving up my life, my dream, right in front of me. They were erasing me from my own creation. The rage that had been simmering in my chest now exploded, a white-hot supernova of betrayal and fury. "Get out," I said, my voice low and trembling. They ignored me, lost in their fantasy of my dispossession. "I said, get out," I roared, shoving my chair back so hard it crashed against the wall. The sound was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. They all stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and indignation, as if I were the one who had crossed a line. "Get out of my house," I repeated, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it scared me. "All of you, now." My father started to bluster, to reassert his authority, but I cut him off. "If you are not out of this house in the next 60 seconds, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The threat, the sheer, unadulterated finality of it, finally registered. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. Olivia looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. Mark's face was a mask of thunderous fury. Slowly, silently, they rose from their chairs. They gathered their things, their movements stiff with wounded pride. As they walked to the door, my mother turned to me, her face a mask of tragic disappointment. "You will regret this, Rebecca," she whispered. "You are tearing this family apart." "No," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the concrete beneath my feet. "You are, and you've just shown me that I was right to build my own world, because you would have burned it to the ground without a second thought." I slammed the door behind them, the sound echoing through the house. And then I was alone, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The war had just begun, and I had a feeling it was going to be a bloody one. The slam of the door was a declaration of war, and my family wasted no time in launching their first offensive. The ensuing days were a relentless siege, a campaign of psychological warfare designed to grind me down until I was nothing but dust and regret. It started with the phone calls. My mother would call me a dozen times a day, her voice a carefully modulated symphony of sorrow and accusation. She'd weep about how I was tearing the family apart, how I had broken her heart, how she didn't know where she had gone wrong with me. When the tears didn't work, she'd switch to guilt, reminding me of every sacrifice, real or imagined, she had ever made for me. My father's approach was less emotional, more brutal. He'd call and lecture me in his booming, authoritative voice, telling me I was a disgrace, an ungrateful child who had forgotten the meaning of family. He'd talk about duty, honor, and respect, words that in his mouth meant obedience and submission. Olivia's attacks were more insidious. She'd send me a barrage of texts, each one a tiny, poisoned dart. "I can't believe you're doing this to us," one would read. "We're going to be homeless because of you," another would claim. She'd send me pictures of her and Mark looking sad and forlorn with captions like, "Trying to stay positive, but it's hard when your own sister betrays you." Then they weaponized the extended family. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called to tell me I was being selfish and that I should be ashamed of myself. My Uncle Robert, my father's brother, left me a voicemail telling me to grow up and do the right thing. They had been fed a carefully curated version of the story, one in which I was the villain, the cold-hearted monster who was denying her poor, deserving sister a home. The most public front of their war was social media. Olivia, a master of the vague, pity-seeking post, went into overdrive. She'd post things on her Instagram and Facebook pages like, "So heartbroken, the people you love the most can hurt you the deepest." Or, "Praying for a miracle, we just want a safe place to call home." She never mentioned me by name, but the implication was clear. The comments section would fill up with her friends and our relatives offering their sympathy and support, their words of comfort, a chorus of condemnation against me. The constant barrage began to take its toll. I stopped answering my phone. I muted their numbers, but the sheer volume of notifications was a constant, buzzing reminder of their assault. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night, their voices echoing in my head, their accusations twisting my thoughts into knots of self-doubt. Was I being selfish? Was I a monster? The stress began to bleed into my work. I'd find myself staring at blueprints, the lines blurring, my mind unable to focus. I'd snap at my colleagues, my patience worn thin by the relentless emotional siege. My sanctuary, my beautiful, perfect house, began to feel like a prison. The walls that had once brought me comfort now felt like they were closing in on me. The final, devastating blow came in the form of a phone call from a former colleague, a man I had once considered a friend. "Becca," he said, his voice hesitant, "I don't know how to say this, but there are rumors going around." "What kind of rumors?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a tight, painful knot. "That you stole the design for your house," he said, his voice low. "That you took the plans from a junior architect at your old firm and passed them off as your own." The phone almost slipped from my hand. The accusation was so vile, so utterly baseless, that for a moment I couldn't even process it. My house was my masterpiece, the culmination of years of study and work. The idea that someone could claim I had stolen it was a violation of the deepest, most personal kind. I knew, with a sickening certainty, where the rumor had come from. Only my family knew the intimate details of my career, the names of my old firms, the people I had worked with. They had taken my greatest accomplishment and twisted it into a weapon to destroy my reputation. That night I sat in the dark, the silence of my house a heavy, suffocating blanket. The weight of their campaign finally crushed me. I curled up on the cold concrete floor, the floor I had poured with my own hands, and I sobbed. The tears were a torrent of rage, grief, and a profound, soul-crushing loneliness. I had built this house to be my fortress, my shield against the world, against them. But they had found a way in. They had bypassed the walls and the locks, and they had struck at the very foundation of my identity. As I lay there, a broken, weeping mess on the floor of my dream home, a panic attack seized me. My chest tightened, my breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. The room began to spin. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of their relentless, merciless assault. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to take my sanity. They were trying to break me, to shatter me into a million pieces so they could sweep me aside and claim the life I had built for myself. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated terror, a new feeling began to emerge from the depths of my despair. It was a tiny, flickering ember of rage, but it was there. And as I gasped for breath, as I fought my way back from the brink of a complete breakdown, that ember began to glow. They wanted a war? Fine, they would have won. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had pushed me to the edge, but they hadn't pushed me over. They had shown me their hand, the depths of their cruelty, the lengths they would go to in order to get what they wanted. And now I would show them mine. The architect was about to become a demolition expert, and I would start with the rotten, crumbling foundation of the family that had tried to bury me alive. The panic attack left me hollowed out, a fragile, empty shell. But in that emptiness, something new took root. The despair that had consumed me began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The tears dried, the fear subsided, and what was left was a bedrock of pure, unadulterated rage. This was my life. This was my home, and I would be damned if I let them take it from me. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The architect in me, the one who lived for plans and precision, took over. I was no longer the victim. I was the strategist, and I would design their downfall with the same meticulous attention to detail that I had used to design my house. My first move was to go on the defensive. I created a new email address and a new folder on my computer, labeled Evidence. I went through my phone, my emails, my social media accounts, and I documented everything. Every vicious text from Olivia, every manipulative voicemail from my mother, every bullying email from my father. I took screenshots of Olivia's pity-seeking posts and the comments from our relatives. I created a timeline, a meticulous record of their harassment, each entry a brick in the wall I was building around myself. Next, I dealt with the plagiarism rumors. I gathered my original sketches, my blueprints, my design notes, every scrap of paper that proved the house was mine. I scanned them all, creating a digital portfolio of my creation. Then, I sent a carefully worded email to a few trusted colleagues, the ones who had been my mentors and champions in the industry. I didn't mention my family. I simply said that there had been a malicious attempt to discredit my work, and I wanted to set the record straight. I attached the portfolio, a silent, irrefutable testament to my ownership. The rumors died within a week. With my defenses shored up, it was time to go on the offensive. My family's campaign was built on a foundation of lies and entitlement. I needed to find the truth, the real reason for their sudden, desperate greed. My gut told me it was about more than just a house. It was about money, and Mark was the one who held the purse strings. I did some preliminary digging online, but his digital footprint was surprisingly clean. Too clean. It was the kind of carefully curated online presence that screamed that he had something to hide. I needed a professional. I found a private investigator online, a woman named Sarah who specialized in financial investigations. She was a former forensic accountant, and her website was a no-nonsense testament to her efficiency. I met her in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop, a world away from the emotional chaos of my life. I laid out the story for her, sticking to the facts, leaving out the emotional turmoil. I told her about my family's demand, their harassment, and my suspicion that Mark's finances were the key to the whole sordid affair. Sarah listened patiently, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She didn't judge. She didn't offer sympathy. She simply nodded and said, "I can look into it, but it will cost you." "I don't care what it costs," I said, my voice firm. "I want to know everything." The next 2 weeks were a strange, surreal waiting game. I went to work, I came home, I lived my life, but it was all a performance. Underneath the surface, I was a coiled spring, waiting for Sarah's call. It came on a Tuesday afternoon. "I have something for you," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Can you meet me?" We met at the same coffee shop. Sarah slid a manila envelope across the table. "He was sloppy," she said, a hint of professional pride in her voice. "They always are." I opened the envelope, my heart pounding. Inside was a detailed report, a roadmap of Mark's financial ruin. He wasn't just bad with money, He was a gambling addict. He had accounts on a dozen offshore betting sites. He had taken out secret loans, maxed out credit cards, and had even remortgaged the small condo he and Olivia owned without her knowledge. He had lost everything. They weren't just broke. They were drowning in a sea of debt. The report was a revelation. This wasn't about finding a nice home for their future family. It was a desperate, greedy grab for a lifeline. They saw my house as a golden ticket, a way to solve all their problems, a way to continue living the lifestyle they felt they were entitled to without any of the work or the sacrifice. I sat there, staring at the report, a cold, clear plan forming in my mind. The architect had the blueprints for their demolition. The foundation of their lies was about to be shattered. I paid Sarah, thanking her for her work. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon sun, the report a heavy, satisfying weight in my bag. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a wild, consuming fire. It was a cold, controlled burn, a laser-focused beam of energy. They had wanted a war. They had wanted to break me, but they had only succeeded in forging me into something stronger, something harder, something they would not recognize. The game had changed. I was no longer playing defense. I was on the attack, and I would show them no mercy. The architect of my own life was about to become the architect of their ruin, and I would enjoy every single moment of it. The Pie's report was a weapon, and I intended to wield it with surgical precision. The time for emotional reactions was over. This was a calculated campaign, and my next move had to be flawless. The following morning, I contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best litigator in the city, a shark named Marcus Thorne who was known for his aggressive tactics and his refusal to lose. I had designed his firm's new office space a year ago, and we had a good rapport. I laid out the entire story for him, from the dinner to the harassment to the Pie's report. I showed him the folder of evidence, the timeline, the screenshots. He listened intently, his face a mask of professional neutrality. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice a low purr. "It's a classic case of harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can burn them to the ground." "I don't want to burn them to the ground," I said, my voice steady. "I want to build a wall so high they can never touch me again." "I can do that too," he said, his eyes gleaming. Our first move was to draft a cease and desist letter. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, a document that dripped with the threat of lawsuits and restraining orders. It detailed every instance of their harassment, citing dates, times, and quotes. It demanded an immediate cessation of all contact, direct or indirect, and warned of severe legal consequences if they failed to comply. We sent it via courier to my parents, Olivia and Mark, ensuring they each received their own personal copy of our declaration of war. Next, we addressed the plagiarism rumors. Marcus advised against a direct confrontation. Instead, he suggested a more subtle approach. I hosted a small, invitation-only cocktail party at my house for a select group of influential architects, designers, and journalists. I framed it as a celebration of my firm's recent successes. On a large, beautifully lit display wall, I showcased the entire design process of my house, from the first, tentative sketches to the final, detailed blueprints. It was a silent, elegant refutation of their lies, a masterstroke of public relations that cemented my reputation and painted me as a confident, talented architect at the top of her game. With the legal and professional groundwork laid, it was time for the final act. It was time to set the trap. I had Marcus draft a formal invitation, sent on his firm's letterhead, to a family reconciliation meeting. The invitation was a work of art, a carefully worded document that spoke of healing, communication, and finding a path forward. It was a Trojan horse, a beautiful, enticing vessel hiding an army of consequences. I knew they wouldn't be able to resist. Their arrogance, their belief in their own righteousness, would be their undoing. They would see the invitation as a sign of my weakness, a white flag of surrender. They would walk into that meeting expecting me to be broken, ready to beg for their forgiveness and hand over the keys to my house. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Marcus's office, a sleek, modern space on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper. The conference room had a panoramic view of the city, a backdrop of power and success that was not lost on me. I arrived early, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. I was not nervous. I was ready. I wore a sharp, black suit, an armor of professionalism that hid the warrior beneath. Marcus greeted me with a nod. "They're on their way up," he said. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for a long time," I said. I stood by the window, looking out at the city I had made my own. I could see the tower I had designed, a gleaming monument to my independence. I had built that. I had built this life, and I would defend it to the death. The door to the conference room opened, and they walked in. My parents, their faces a mixture of grim satisfaction and parental disapproval. Olivia, her expression a mask of triumphant pity. And Mark, his smirk a testament to his belief that he had already won. They saw me standing by the window, and their expressions shifted slightly. They had expected to see me flanked by my lawyer, a nervous, trembling wreck. Instead, they saw me alone, calm, and in control. They took their seats at the long, polished table, a united front of entitlement. They looked at me, their eyes full of expectation, waiting for me to begin my groveling apology. I let the silence stretch, a delicious, palpable tension in the air. I watched them squirm, their confidence beginning to waver. Finally, I turned from the window and looked at them, my face a blank, unreadable mask. The trap was set. The bait had been taken, and they were about to find out what it felt like to be caught in a cage of their own making. The architect was about to bring the whole rotten structure of their lies crashing down around them, and the demolition was about to begin. The silence in the conference room was a weapon, and I wielded it with the skill of a seasoned warrior. I let it hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket of their own expectations. They had walked in here expecting a surrender, and my silence was the first sign that they were not going to get it. Finally, my father, ever the patriarch, broke the silence. "Well, Rebecca," he said, his voice booming with false magnanimity, "we're here, we're willing to listen. We're willing to forgive you for your outburst." I simply looked at him, my expression unreadable. I didn't say a word. Marcus, my lawyer, took that as his cue. He walked into the room, his presence radiating an aura of calm, lethal competence. He placed a stack of documents on the table in front of him, the sound a sharp, definitive thud in the quiet room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but with an underlying edge of steel. "My name is Marcus Thorne, and I am Rebecca's legal counsel." My family exchanged surprised glances. They had expected a tearful, emotional confrontation, not a formal, legal proceeding. "Before we begin," Marcus continued, "I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification." He slid a copy of the cease and desist letter across the table to each of them. "As you are all aware, you were sent this document last week. It details a pattern of harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress against my client. It is a legally binding order to cease all contact. Any violation of this order will result in immediate legal action, including a restraining order and a civil lawsuit for damages." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Harassment? We were just trying to talk to our daughter." "You were trying to bully her into giving you her home," Marcus said, his voice cold. "And you used slander and emotional manipulation as your weapons. That is the legal definition of harassment." Mark sneered. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove any of this." "Oh, but we can," Marcus said, a predatory glint in his eye. He gestured to the stack of documents in front of him. "We have copies of every text, every email, every voicemail. We have screenshots of every social media post. We have a detailed, documented timeline of your entire campaign. We are more than prepared to present this evidence in a court of law." The color drained from Olivia's face. My father's jaw clenched. They had been so sure of their own righteousness that they had never considered the possibility that their own words could be used against them. But the cease and desist order was just the opening salvo. The real bombshell was yet to come. I finally spoke, my voice calm and steady. You came here today expecting me to give you my house. You justified it by saying that Olivia and Mark deserve it, that they are a young couple starting a family who need a stable home. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. Then I looked directly at Mark. But that's not the real reason, is it, Mark? I slid the pie's report across the table. It landed in front of him with a soft, damning thud. The real reason is that you're a gambling addict who has lost everything. The real reason is that you're drowning in debt, and you see my house as your personal bailout. The effect was instantaneous. Olivia's face, which had been a mask of indignant fury, crumbled into a mosaic of shock and betrayal. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Mark, what is she talking about? Mark's face was a thunderous mask of rage. He lunged for the report, but Marcus was faster. He snatched it back, his movements swift and precise. It's all in there, Olivia, I said, my voice devoid of pity. The offshore betting accounts, the secret loans, the second mortgage on your condo. He didn't just gamble away his money, he gambled away yours too. Olivia began to sob, a raw, guttural sound of a woman whose world had just been shattered. My mother rushed to her side, glaring at me with a look of pure hatred. You monster! How could you do this to your own sister? I didn't do this, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound power. He did, and you enabled him. You were so blinded by your favoritism, so convinced of your own entitlement, that you never once stopped to ask why they were so desperate. You just assumed you had the right to take what was mine. I let that sink in, the ugly truth of their own complicity. Then, I delivered the final, crushing blow. But I'm not just here to expose your lies, I said. I'm here to protect my future, and to do that, I've made some arrangements. Marcus slid another document across the table. This, he said, is the charter for a new family trust. Rebecca has placed her house and all of her other assets into this trust. My parents stared at the document, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. What does this mean? My father demanded. It means, I said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face, that the house is no longer mine to give. It belongs to the trust, and the trust has some very specific rules. I leaned forward, my eyes locking with my parents. You are named as beneficiaries of this trust. Upon my death, you will inherit everything. A flicker of greed of victory sparked in their eyes, but I wasn't finished. However, I continued, there is a clause, a very important clause. Your inheritance is contingent upon you maintaining a positive and supportive relationship with me for the rest of my life, and the determination of what constitutes positive and supportive will be made by an independent executor, a third party who will review our entire history of communication. I paused, letting the full weight of my words land. Any act of harassment, any attempt at manipulation, any form of sabotage against me or my life will be considered a violation of that clause, and any violation will result in your immediate and permanent disinheritance. The silence in the room was absolute. The trap had been sprung. The cage had been locked. They had not only lost the house, they had lost any future claim to it. Their greed, their entitlement, their cruelty had cost them everything. I looked at their shattered, defeated faces, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of power over them. Not the power of a bully, but the power of a survivor. The power of a woman who had been to hell and back, and had emerged stronger, harder, and utterly, gloriously free. The demolition was complete, and from the ruins of my toxic family, I would finally be able to build a life of peace. The aftermath of the meeting was not a fiery explosion, but a slow, satisfying implosion. The foundations of my family, already rotten with entitlement and deceit, crumbled under the weight of the truth. The silence from their side was absolute. The cease and desist order, combined with the trust's brutal, elegant clause, had built a wall so high and so thick that not even their toxicity could penetrate it. The news of Mark's gambling addiction and financial ruin spread through the extended family like wildfire. The narrative they had so carefully crafted, of the poor, deserving couple and the cruel, selfish sister, was shattered. The pity they had garnered turned to scorn. Mark and Olivia became pariahs, their names spoken in hushed, judgmental tones. Their desperate grab for my house was no longer seen as a righteous quest, but as the pathetic, greedy gambit it had always been. I blocked their numbers, their email addresses, their social media profiles. I severed every tie, every digital and emotional cord that connected us. For the first time in my life, I was truly, completely free from their influence. The silence was a balm, a healing quiet that settled over my life like a gentle snow, muffling the echoes of their voices, their demands, their expectations. My house, once a battleground, became my sanctuary again. The walls that had felt like they were closing in on me now felt like a warm embrace. The light that streamed through the windows I had designed seemed brighter, cleaner. I would walk through the rooms, my bare feet on the cool, smooth concrete, and a sense of profound peace would wash over me. I had fought for this. I had bled for it, and I had won. Months passed, the seasons changed. I thrived. My work flourished. I won a prestigious award for the Downtown Tower project. I traveled. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I built a life for myself, a life of joy and purpose and quiet, unassuming strength. One day, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. Her handwriting, once so familiar, now seemed like a relic from a distant, painful past. I almost threw it away, but a flicker of morbid curiosity, a need for a final, definitive closure, made me open it. Letter was a masterpiece of self-pity and blame. She wrote of her heartbreak, her loneliness, her confusion. She painted herself as the victim, the loving mother whose daughter had turned on her for no reason. She accused me of being cold, unforgiving, and cruel. She never once mentioned Mark's gambling, Olivia's complicity, or their own monstrous demand. There was no apology, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain they had caused me. It was as if the meeting in Marcus's office had never happened. I read the letter, and I felt a flicker of the old pain, the ghost of the little girl who had so desperately craved her mother's love and approval. But it was just a flicker, a faint, dying echo. It had no power over me anymore. I took the letter to my fireplace, the one I had designed with a sleek, modern hearth. I struck a match, the flame a tiny, defiant spark in the quiet of my living room. I watched as the paper caught fire, my mother's words curling into black, brittle ash. I watched until there was nothing left but smoke and memory. As I stood there, watching the last wisp of smoke disappear up the chimney, the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. The light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the space I had created, the life I had built, the peace I had earned. The golden cage was broken, the bars were shattered, and I was finally, irrevocably free. I had not just won a battle, I had reclaimed my life. I had rewritten my story. And the ending was more beautiful, more satisfying, more profoundly peaceful than anything I could have ever designed. It was the quiet, triumphant sigh of a soul that had finally, truly come home.